This is so much fun. Welcome, everyone, from around the globe. Thanks for joining us here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm really glad that we have Kevin Griffin tonight because I'm really excited to learn about this talk. He's going to teach us about making our static websites really fast. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, glad to be here, guys. We'll talk about a relatively new feature in Azure. So if you're not in Azure, you're probably not familiar with what I call the catalog of things that Azure can do. I like to equate it to Cheesecake Factory. If anyone's ever been to a Cheesecake Factory, you know they don't give you a menu. They give you a catalog of food because there's so many choices. Azure is the same way, just like AWS and everything out there, where there's so many things that it can do. It's really hard to keep track of all the really cool things that are in there. And you just miss out. So I want to talk about one of my new favorite things, and that's Azure Static Web Apps. So before we dive in anymore, those who don't know me, it's been a very long time since I've spoken in Arizona. I can't even place the year. It was I was out there with Joe for something. It was probably around Code Camp time. No, it was before Code Camp. Is when I worked for a company that would pay for my travel. So I flew out there and I did a user group. Well, that was a very long time ago, probably like 2011, if I recall that far back. But
That was Norton,
I'm glad to be
right?
with you all virtually. What's that?
That was Norton, right?
I don't know. I don't remember. No, it was at
I'm
co-working
kidding.
space. What was the co-working space there in
Gangplank.
Scottsdale? What's that?
Gangplank.
Yes, it was a Gangplank. Yep, I remember that much. I remember drinking with Joe, and not remembering much. So those who don't know me, I don't blame you. My name's Kevin. I'm a Microsoft MVP. My focus is in primarily ASP.NET Core development and deploying small line of business applications to Microsoft Azure. So nothing too big, nothing too complex. I'm very active on Twitter and on Twitch. I actually did a user group a little bit earlier, and I was on Twitch doing that. So you can hit me up on both of those at @1KevGriff. I'm also somewhat active on my website, consultwithgriff.com, and you can go read various things in there. I actually have an article on there about static web apps. So if you want to read something a little bit more complete, I have a couple posts over there. But my big thing I'm known for kind of in the industry is real-time web development with SignalR, which is a .NET technology. And I have a brand new course called SignalR Mastery that I would love to invite you to go check out up on Udemy. But we're not talking about SignalR tonight, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I would love for you to go check it out. But this talk is completely unscripted. We're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to talk about some of why you even want to use static web apps. We'll walk through the process of deploying one and kind of show you how easy it is. And I always figured the easiest way to do that is to do it from scratch. So I can answer your questions along the way. We can have a conversation. It's 9:30 at night for me on the East Coast. I'm in conversation mood. I'm not in presentation mood. So we're just going to do this live because the next slide is basically Q&A. We're not there yet. All right, let's talk about what a static web app is first. I'm at a command prompt, and I'm going to create a static website with a static website generator. And there's a lot of them out there. You probably have heard of at least one of them, Gatsy. Of course, I'm blanking on the other ones. I'm going to use one called Gridsome. Gridsome is like Gatsby, but it's Vue instead of React. That's how I. So we'll say Gridsome creates. We'll call this NWVDNUG. Of course, I'm spelling it wrong. And Gridsome is a static site generator, meaning you're going to write all your code for all your different pages. You can bring in outside sources like Markdown or RSS feeds or YouTube or you name it, and it will statically generate the entire site. And the biggest reason that you would even want to have a statically generated site is because web browsers are insanely efficient web servers are insanely efficient at sending down raw HTML, JavaScript, CSS. Most performance hits, as little as they might be, come when a dynamic web server, so ASP.NET Core, PHP, Laravel, Node.js, Express, anytime any logic has to be performed to serve up the HTML, you're going to take a small performance hit. With a statically generated site, you're just looking something up on the file system and delivering the payload. You cannot get any physically faster than that. Because once the web server has done some sort of caching on its end, it's not even pulling that content off a disk. It's just pulling it out of RAM and delivering the content. So it's, for a lot of use cases, building a statically generated site works really well. So I built one here in Gridsome. Now, you don't need to know anything about Gridsome. Let's go into our folder, and I'm just going to run this. So Gridsome, I'll do two things. I'll open it in VS Code, and then I'm going to run the local site. So gridsome.develop.
Did you have to install something to get that working?
Yeah, Gridsome has a command line interface that you install via npm in a very similar fashion as you would with Gatsy or other generators. If I open it up in a browser, it looks like this. And it doesn't seem like much, but you can flip between the two different views. And because of this is written in Vue, so VUE, this is all Vue markup. But these pages come down as just static HTML. And there's a little bit of client-side magic to prefetch a lot of the different views. So you just get this crazy performance at runtime. So this particular server is a server. It's doing all this work dynamically, which kind of defeats the purpose of statically generated sites. So let's do a build of the page. So I'll say Gridsome build instead. It's going to go through all the contents and whatnot, and it's going to generate a distribution file. So let's open this in. So we're already in VS Code. I'm going to zoom in a little. I have this distribution folder, and I'll zoom in. Is zoom in not working? Do I have zoom in on? Nope. So we'll go in the hard way. So I have this distribution folder, and you can see I have index.html. This is raw HTML. I have an about folder with an index.html file in it, which is more raw HTML. We even have statically generated 404 pages. And one of the things that Gridsome does, Gatsy does, Hexo does, Hugo does, is that they add a little bit of JavaScript in here to give you this spa-like look and feel. So not only if I try to load a file and it doesn't exist, there's a little bit of JavaScript in here that will forward automatically to the 404 page. But we're not here to talk about Gridsome. We're not here to talk about Gatsy or anything. We're just trying to set this baseline of I have static HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and images. So CSS, JavaScript, and like fave icons and all that good stuff. So I have this payload, and let me escape. I want to serve this payload up. Well, there's different ways you could do that now if you wanted to. If you're on Azure, and I'm going to talk strictly Azure because that's what I know. I'll try to translate to AWS where I can. You could set up blob storage in Azure, which is insanely cheap. You could put all these distribution files in blob storage and tell blob storage, this is a website. And give everything out to the internet, whoever hits it up, as long as you know the different paths. That works insanely well. You can do the same thing on S3, works insanely well. There's some issues with that, but not huge issues. It just works really well. In Azure, you could also use an app service. So an app service, you could take all the files, put in an app service and serve it up behind IIS, a legitimate web server. That is actually overkill for a statically generated site because you have this huge engine for serving up files. And you're just serving up raw HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. It kind of defeats the purpose. The nice thing about having an app service is you could also have things like you could have an ASP.NET Core site or a Node Express site that's running in the back end, and you can have some sort of API that runs alongside your statically generated site. So there's a pro to using app services. Well, recently they added this new thing called static web apps. And let me show you a demo of everything. I'm going to delete this distribution folder. I'm going to do a couple things real fast. I already have a, let me do a git init. I'm going to do a git add. We'll do a quick commit, just call this the init. Now, they already gave me a git ignore, so I didn't have to worry about that distribution folder. But I'm going to go create a new, say again?
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt you. Is this video recorded?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
No problem. Sorry. I'm going to go create a new repository up in GitHub. I'm picking GitHub for a very specific reason. It's only support. This whole feature only works in GitHub. That's why. So we're going to call this NWVD static. And we'll keep it private, all that good stuff. We create repository. I'm going to push up my remotes. And let me select both of those. Yep. Push everything up to main. So now I have my static site up in GitHub. I can refresh and it's sending up there. Here, I'll even drop it into the Zoom chat. So if y'all want to go play along. Here, let me bring up chat. Chat.
Will we be able to get to it if it's private?
No, it's public.
Oh, okay. I thought you made it. Sorry.
Yep. I'm not hiding anything. It's all public. All right, so we have it up in GitHub right now. And that's technically step 2. Step 1 is have the site. Step 2 is to put it in GitHub. And there it is. Step 3, we're going to go over to Azure. I've already created a resource group in Azure for the user group. I have no resources. There's nothing up my sleeve. We're going to go add a new resource, and we're going to tell it to add a static web app. Now, static web apps are still in preview. I don't know when they're going to be out of preview. They've been in preview for about 6, 8, 9 months now. Most likely when the next major Microsoft event comes along, whether they do a build this year or if they do it in Ignite, this will probably go general usage. But we'll come in here, say create. And if you've never set up anything in Azure, it follows kind of the same pattern. You select your subscription that you want to get charged to. Static web apps are currently free for whatever usage you have. So I don't know what it would look like when it goes live, how much it's going to charge. I don't think it's going to be very much, or it's going to be a serverless model where you're only paying for consumption. So I wish I had an answer for you. But we're going to give this static web app a name. So I'm going to call it NWVDGN static. You have to choose a region. Now, they're not in every Azure region yet because it's in preview. But I'll select East US 2 because why not? Deployment details. I can select GitHub. Oh, and this is actually, they've added this recently. You can select other. I have not played with that, so we're not going to go that direction. But I'm going to sign in with my GitHub. Give me 1 second. Yep. Authorize. Yep, confirm my password. Just don't ask for my 2-factor auth. Once I'm authenticated with GitHub, I have to tell it which organization. It's going to go get all my repos. So somewhere in here, what did I call it? NW Nug static. It's going to ask me which branch do I want to deploy off of. this is kind of important. So where are my production level, where's my production level code going to exist? For me, it's just going to be in main or master. For you, it might be something else. I'm going to say main. And then it's going to ask me some build details about my application. Because it knows it's working with statically generated sites, it says, well, are you working with an Angular app or a React app or Svelte or Vue.js or Blazor or Gatsby, Hugo, ViewPress or something else? Well, if you're using one of the common ones, you just select it and it knows all the defaults for these different environments because they have different npm commands and whatnot. Technically, I can just use Vue.js and it works fine for me. It's going to ask you a couple other questions. The next one is, where's your app located? Mine's in the root of my repository. I don't need to change anything. But if for some reason I had my source code under, say, source, client, something, 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 I could put in that full path here, and that helps the wizard figure out how to build my static application. I have this funny thing next that's API, and API is fun because we're going to come back to it. But part of having my static site is static sites can only do so much because they're static sites. What if I need to write some sort of server-side code? Well, Azure Functions fit that criteria, but I don't want to go set up a separate app service just for Azure Functions and go through all that ceremony. What if I could just import my Azure Functions into my static site? Well, that's what this path is for, but we're not going to touch this path yet. We're going to come back to it in a couple of minutes. The third option is, what's the output location? That's why I did the build earlier. I wanted to show you that when we build our site, it puts everything into a distribution folder. Well, your app might be different, but my app uses distribution, and that's what it's going to put in as the default. All right, assuming I set all this up correctly, I'm going to go to the next screen. I don't know anyone that uses tags, so I'm going to move on to the commit wizard, and we'll hit create. Now, this should only take a second. One of the things it's going to do during this entire process is it's going to add a GitHub action to your app. So if I go to resource, so my site's been allocated. It has a URL with some weird, funky name that's randomly created. But we see here, there's deployment history. It's not just getting the code from GitHub. It's also using GitHub Actions to run through its deployment process. We can go back over to our code, hit refresh. We see they've added, on my behalf, a new commit to this repository. It added a workflow for GitHub Actions. I can go to GitHub Actions and see that it's currently building a new version of the site. Let's go in, we can just watch the workflow. So build and deploy. And that's why I keep a very simple Gridsome site, because this should not take very much time. It's going to go pull the site down. It's going to run through a build process. So you see it's running npm install right now. It's getting all the local npm packages. We'll walk back through this here in a moment when it's all done. So npm install. So even up in the cloud, this takes for flipping ever. You have to imagine with the Azure resources, npm would be a little bit more efficient, right? All right, so we sit here and we wait, and there's some chatter in here. Barry, other was added within the last few days. Yep, that's usually what happens to me. They add something the moment I'm about to do a talk on it.
The worst for me is when they remove something right about before I'm going to do a talk on it.
Yeah, something critical too. It's like, hold up. Or they replace it. It's like, oh no, someone moved the cheese and I don't know what to do.
They just moved it somewhere where it's still there, but you can't find it when you need it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll let this run for a second. Let's go back over to the portal because I kind of want to talk through what's in the portal. So there's just some simple analytics. So you see a number of requests that you're getting, how much bandwidth data that you're sending out at any time. Where, you know what, I kind of want to wait until everything's done because these other sections make a little bit more sense when everything's said and done. You can set configuration options. So if you need to set any sort of environment variables for your build process, you can do that here. That's not a problem. They added application insight support if you have Azure Functions turned on. I don't yet, so I can't use that option. We can also set up configuration for custom domains. So if you have your own custom domain, you can come add it here. And they just fixed it, like literally last week, where they support Apex domains now, or naked domains. So if I wanted to use just consultwithgrip.com, I can just use consultwithgrip.com. Before you had to be on a subdomain, so www.consultwithgrip.com. And who uses www anymore? It's old stuff. Thanks, Barry, for telling me. So if we go back through this, here's build and deploy. It's all completed. Well, let's run through the what happened. Now let's scroll down here. So it went through. It did the npm install, and then it did npm run build. Because most of these systems run off npm in some way, shape, or form, 99% of them use npm run build to build production versions of the packages. You can see it says, all right, I'm going to run Gridsome. Goes through, does all the Gridsome stuff. It prepares its output, and it goes through, and there's this build system called Oryx. What Oryx does is looks at everything that's generated in our distribution folder in GitHub Actions. It zips it up, kind of, sort of, and deploys it to our Azure Static Web Apps. So you can see here, it finishes the upload, and we're now available at grayplant.azurestaticwebapps.net. So here we go. We can drop that into the chat for everyone. You can go there and you can access my static web app, and it is super quick. It just works really well. All right, that's magical. All the cool stuff's happening. Now, what's interesting is this is part of a GitHub action. If I go back to my code, let's do a git pull everything down fresh. The only thing it pulled down was the YAML file that got created. Let's go into some code, and we'll go into index. So we'll change world to everyone. Have a great day. Hit save. Yep, shut up. So this is just Vue. If you don't understand Vue, that's fine. There's a template, there's a little bit of JavaScript, and then there's some CSS styling. And this is a component in the entire system. But I just changed one of the header tags. And I'm going to take that and say git add, let's commit it, and push that up to GitHub. Well, that new push is going to trigger a new GitHub action, and it's going to go back through that process again. So, sorry, we have to sit through this one more time. But you know what? While this is running, let's talk about another facet of Azure Static Web Apps. So we'll go in here, and I just made a small change, but maybe changes you're going to make are a little bit larger, and you don't want to do them in main. Maybe you want to do them in their own branch. So let's go ahead and check out to feature 1. So we're in a new branch. We're already in VS Code. And I'm going to just take this H1 and make a whole bunch of them. That's going to look horrible, but go with me. Let's take this feature branch. We're going to add our changes. We'll commit and say H1 party. And we're going to push that feature branch up into GitHub. Then we're going to go set up a pull request, because all good developers, you do pull requests, right? You don't commit directly to master or main. So we'll call it H1 party. Create the pull request and see, okay, well, we changed a whole bunch of H1s in here. Well, not only that, Azure Static Web Apps is going to kick in and going to build a test environment for me automatically of this code. And Static Web Apps calls this an environment. So this is going to start building. Let's go see how this guy is doing over here. Yeah, it's still deploying and running, but I'm running two actions technically at the same time. Let's switch back over to the portal while all this code's building in the back end. So I have this section here called environments, and they've recently changed it where I think you can have up to 3 environments at any one time, other than your main production environment. But they haven't created the other ones yet. But every time you create a branch, GitHub Actions is going to create a staging environment for it. Very similar to slots in app services if you use Azure App Services. So I'm going to have a specific staging area just for that PR I created, so I can go test that code in the full environment without affecting anything in production. But that's going to take a moment. So let's just let's sit back and wait. You'd like to think that this gets a little bit more efficient the more you do it. But here we go. All right, so we're going to wait for this. 2 minutes. There we are. So post complete. All right, so my main update is done, meaning if I go to overview, go back to my page, we see, hello everyone, have a great day. So my site is now updated with the new change. Well, that's pretty cool. All right, go away, Zoom. I'm going to move you over there. Well, let's go back to the PR. The PR is still cranking away. There's, we can go to details for this particular GitHub action. It's still building. It's doing its thing. Looks like it's doing an upload. So it's almost done. We'll sit here. We'll just hold on for just another moment. Actually, I'm going to refresh. I think I killed the WebSocket. No, I didn't. I'm fine.
While we're waiting for the build, how are you blurring your Azure stuff?
Say that again.
How are you blurring the Azure portal?
Oh, I have an extension in Edge called AZ Mask. It automatically blurs all the GUIDs in Azure. So works really well for this.
That's really cool.
So our GitHub Actions done. Our test environment has been deployed. And notice that it's added a comment to the PR telling me your staging area is set up and ready to go. We can go visit it right now and see this is the production. This is the staging version of our site ready for review. And every time we push something to this branch, this PR is going to automatically rebuild itself and write something to the PR log saying the site's been re-uploaded. Here's the URL all over again. This is really handy if you have a couple of different things going on at the same time. I use this feature for my personal blog just for testing, where it's nice. I can start writing a blog post. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like when it's published. Even though I'm running everything locally, I'll create the PR and go to the staging site. I can see everything is working the way that I expect it to. When you're ready to deploy it, you can just hit merge the PR. And now I did that a little too quickly. I should have went back here to the environment. So I got here just in time. So you can see we have the staging area for that particular branch. But what's nice about static sites and being a GitHub action, it's automatically going to clean up behind itself. So I think if I wait, of course, now it's going to call me a liar. It should automatically clean up that staging area. That's part of the action. Because I delete the branch. All right. See, it's not deleting it, but it's totally supposed to delete that branch. Oh, well, let's pretend it deleted the branch. Or maybe it doesn't when it's all built. Yeah, it's supposed to delete that branch. It's supposed to clean up after itself, but it hasn't yet. But that's another key feature of Azure Static Web Apps, is that you're able to create these staging areas, and you can basically build out something, and when you're ready to deploy, you deploy, it cleans up after itself, and you can, everything's automatically built in production. So kind of the last big thing to talk about is sometimes you run into a use case where you need something server-side. Let me give you a good example. I'm going to go to my personal site, consultwithgrip.com, and I want to talk about two things on here. Thing number one is I have this badge up here at the top, which is says whether or not I'm live on Twitch. And what that is server-side logic, because I need some sort of logic that can go to Twitch, look to see what my current status is, and then feed my status into an image tag to determine which image tag gets displayed. Not something you can easily do with a client-side application. So I built this in Azure Functions, and I do all that work in Azure Function, and then I display the output in my statically generated site. Another use case is, you might see down here at the bottom, I have Recaptcha. Recaptcha's entire premise is that you are working in a client-side app, and you have to basically validate with Recaptcha to determine whether the person filling out a form is a legitimate user. Are you a robot type thing? Well, that doesn't work unless you have a server-side component, because you need some sort of trusted endpoint that can talk with a private key to Recaptcha to verify that you're a legitimate user. So I built an Azure function that talks to Recaptcha to verify all these different requests. Specifically, on any of my blog posts, I have this lead magnet. Well, this is behind there's a hidden Recaptcha here, and you can't see it. So you type in your information, hit subscribe. It's going to send your information to an Azure function. Azure function is going to verify that you're a human, and then it's going to forward that request on to the email marketing stuff. So I need Azure Functions to do all this. Well, when I built my site, all I had was Azure Functions. I didn't have Azure Static Web Apps. And I always thought, well, this would be really useful to have all in one package. And that's what you can do with Static Web Apps. Let's take another step back. Let's go back to main. We'll do a git pull. I'm going to do another branch here. So we'll branch and we'll call it Azure Func. And I'm going to make a new directory called API. We'll go into, actually, we'll open in VS Code. So cd API, open in VS Code, because I have a helper in here. Let me find it. Oh, did I not install it here? Yes, I did. All right. So create a new project. Yep. And API. Static Web Apps supports JavaScript, and apparently now supports C# as well. I'm feeling frisky. Let's try a C# Azure function to make sure it works, because that's what they told me. Last time I did this talk, they didn't support C#, and I didn't realize that. I went through this entire demo, it didn't work. So had to revert and do a JavaScript one. Yeah, it's bad times. I'm going to use LTS because they just released support for .NET 5. I have not tested that yet. I'm not going down that road tonight. So we'll do, all right. And you can only do HTTP triggers, and it might be one other, but I'm not quite sure. I think it's only HTTP triggers off the top of my head. So we'll just create HTTP trigger C#1. That's a great name. Provide namespace. Company function, that works well. We're going to make this an anonymous function. And we're not going to change anything about it. We're just going to accept the call and spit back the response. So let's take this and let's go ahead and look at git status, git add dot. That adds all the Azure function CRUD. So we'll do a git commit, add az function. We're going to push that up to GitHub. We'll create our pull request. And this is going to kick off the next build. But while we're waiting for this, let's walk through another function real fast. Or not a function, a action. So I want to show you. Oh, this says it cleaned itself up. Yep, all right. Took it a minute, but it cleaned up after itself, like I said it was supposed to. So let's run through build and deploy. So the build system for this, as I said before, is called Oryx. There's actually an entire GitHub repo on it. So if you're interested about what stuff's doing underneath the scenes, you can go read all the documentation, because so much of Azure Static Web Apps is extendable. This entire build system is extendable. There's some other like really cool features that I'm probably not even going to cover here. But so one of the things that they do is it looks for an API folder. So if you don't specify one where your API is supposed to live, it's going to assume just API. If it finds API, it's going to assume that's an Azure function. It's going to try to build it as an Azure function and deploy that as a part of your application. So that's what should be happening in the other repo right now. Let's go ahead and bring this up real fast. So a couple cool things you can do with Oryx that they're documented really well, but let me find not that. I have an article I wrote on it. Azure Static Web App, redirection. So another really good reason to use Azure Static Web Apps over, say, Blob Storage is you might have a case where you need to set up a redirect. I had this case with my personal website. I needed to set up a redirect from one URL to another. And if you're running on any common web server, you can set up rewrite rules and the web server will take care of that stuff for you. Blob Storage does not run behind a traditional web server that you can override and control. So Blob Storage just cannot solve this issue of traditional rewrite rules. Azure Static Web Apps can. There's a way that you can create a special JSON folder or file in the root of your repository called routes.json, and you can create all these route redirects. So basically you can tell Azure Static Web Apps, if you see route A, I want you to do a 301 redirect to a different route or a 302 redirect to a different route. This is really handy. And it's actually one of my projects for next week is I'm taking my personal site. I have a whole bunch of old URLs I don't support anymore, but I want to redirect to different URLs. I'm going to generate this routes JSON, deploy everything on Azure Static Web Apps, so I don't get killed in 404 land, which is where I'm currently at. So this is really handy.
Does this file support regex?
It's supposed to.
Cool.
I haven't actually done that, but you know what they say about regex. If you have a problem that regex solves, now I have two problems. But yeah, I'm told it's actually, I have a link in here to the documentation somewhere. And I'm pretty sure there's an example using regex. Did I put source code? I didn't put a link to the documentation. That was so mean of me. Yeah, somewhere in the documentation on docs.microsoft.com, I'm pretty sure there's an example using regex. All right.
Is there Kevin, is there a link in there also for the plugin that you used in Visual Studio Code?
For Azure Functions?
Yeah.
No, because this is just the Azure extension. Oh, and I just realized they added static web apps to it. I haven't used that, so I don't know how that's supposed to work. All right, let's look through build and deploy before I test any of this. All right, it found API. That's good. So it went through. It built my Gridsome service. And then it's trying to build the API. It realizes it's .NET. It's going to use .NET 3.1. It's going to do the build. It's all right. No errors. That's good. So it deployed. All right. There are no errors. This is usually a net win, right? You have no build errors. So first unit test always passes. Let's go back into our portal, and we can go into functions. Now there should be one function in there. Oh, sorry. It's inside a different environment. It's in the staging environment. What? Oh, there it is. Trigger C#1. All right. If I did this part correctly, that's how I preface all these things. If I did this correctly, let's go into our pull request. Let's go into Azure AZ function. We have our new URL. All right. It deploys your Azure functions under API. This HTTP trigger function executed successfully. Passed in a name. Let's do name equals Kevin. Hello, Kevin. This HTTP trigger triggered, executed successfully. So we have a win. We have a static web app with Azure Functions backend, all in the same repo, deploying to the same Azure Static Web App, and it's free. And this is a net win for me across the board, where in the next week or two, I get to take what I was previously supporting on Blob Storage and a paid Azure Functions account to do a couple things. I'm going to migrate all those over to a single repository that's running Azure Static Web Apps and has injected Azure Functions as my serverless backend. And because it's all coming from the same domain, I don't have to worry about silly things like cores or figuring out. I can really lock down these Azure Functions because it's all coming from the same domain, not multiple domains like I had previously. So this is, kind of a great way to wrap up. I can hit merge. Again, this is going to merge everything into the main site. But I've kind of covered the core aspects of it. That this is a great, here we go. Wow. 60, 70 requests. Assume a couple of you were hitting that site after I put it in the chat. We also have our function hits, and if I get any errors, and I can set up application insights on the Azure Functions as well. That's a newer feature as well, because they didn't have that weeks and weeks ago last time I did this talk. But I'm gonna open things up for questions now. I answer them the best I can. I love this tool, and I'm trying to do more and more with it. And I just need them to get out of preview so I can put actual clients on it. Bring on the questions.
Hey, quick question here.
Yes, sir.
What if we are not using GitHub? For example, if my company is using GitLab.
That is actually a relatively new story. I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I did. We'd have to go through this entire process again and select other. I'm not sure if you were here when I was walking through the setup process.
I did, but I didn't see anything like GitLab or I didn't find any other resources.
So if we were walking back through it, there was there we go. So if we go back through here, static web app. Yeah, last time I did this talk a month or two ago, it was only GitHub. So let's say other. After the app is created, open it and follow the instructions to deploy your app. I have no idea what that means. But let's
that may be region specific too, Kevin. So it may not show up in some regions and others it may. So
good point. Yeah, because they're still in preview.
I have a good answer
highly
here, though.
limited. Let's this should deploy pretty quickly. Click to configure deploy an app. All right, this is a bad time when it sends you to the head of. That's not what I want.
Yeah, and if you notice that the environment.
Okay. Most likely there's a script somewhere that shows you, all right, take this deployment token and here's how you deploy to Azure Static Web Apps. It's probably very
open
similar
up your other
to like
repo,
web deploy or whatnot.
Open up the GitHub repo and open up the .github folder. And inside there, open up the workplace folder.
Oh, yep. I see where you're going with
Workflows folder. And then open up that file. That's the build script. So
Yeah.
if you can replicate that in GitLab or in Circle CI or anywhere else, you can get at what you need to. And the magic sauce that they're passing it is that Azure Static Web Apps API token, gray plant, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you'll need to create that token yourself. And that's the thing that you copy and paste. But there isn't much to this build. You could do it with a different GitHub action, or you could just call npm install and then npm run build and achieve the same results.
I'm just scanning through the documentation, seeing if anyone's written anything. The next, publish with Azure Devops. This is new. Yeah, let's show you how new this is. Updated 2 days ago. So this is them creating a GitHub repo in Azure Devops, creating their static web app, getting your deployment token, creating a pipeline. And they're giving you, it's what Rob is alluding to. They basically have a task in Azure DevOps that's Azure Static Web App. So I think they put that other there, and it's like classic Microsoft. We're going to put something there, but we're not going to explain it. We're going to just leave that up to the imagination. Because all this is doing is you're pasting in your deployment token, and you're crossing your fingers that it works. And really, like, these Azure Static Web Apps are just like they're versions of app services, or they're versions of so app services are just Azure Service Fabric underneath the scenes. It's all managed virtual machines. So it's probably creating a very smaller, you're on a shared virtual machine with a bunch of other people. And they're probably using web deploy or already built-in deployment services. They're just trying to wrap this layer around it, and that's what GitHub Actions is, and what now DevOps is. What's this? Deploy from a framework. There's a couple of folks out there have done Blazor deployments, which I think is super interesting. But even all these were still through GitHub. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's still a very preview thing, so it's very up in the air how much support you're going to get.
I wouldn't be surprised if one of the primary goals in creating this was to support Blazor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do not disagree. All right. Well, cool. All right, friends. Well, by my course, thank you for having me. I'll hang around as long as anyone's willing to chat. So no harm, no foul.
Awesome. This was very cool. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of
I
fun.
completely
I love
agree.
these preview
That was
features.
amazing.
Say that again?
I completely agree. That was amazing. Based on the title that we got, I was thinking, here's how to use Azure Storage and how to set up a custom domain.
Yep.
This was not that. This was really cool.
It's more in line with developer like workflow. You know, they give us all these great tools. Let's use these tools for something good. Actually, I didn't show this. Let me show my personal site. So my personal site is a public repo on GitHub, and Griffin v4. There it is. So I have the Pendabot. I have I technically have two sets of GitHub actions. I have the one I had built before Static Web Apps that literally takes everything in the repo, it builds it, and then I upload to Azure Blob Storage. So I have a task here that goes and takes my key, it uploads everything to Blob Storage, and the site itself is hosted from Blob Storage. And then I have another app service that's just Azure Functions for the couple things I need Azure Functions for. That works really well. Well, I took the same site and said, well, let me hook this up for Static Web Apps, even though I can't use it. And the reason I can't use it is because at the time, they didn't support Apex domains. So I couldn't do that. I had to do www or some sort of subdomain. I don't like that. So I got rid of it. I didn't use it. But I still build from Azure Static Web Apps. So now I have a different GitHub action, which is the built-in Static Web Apps, which I have to actually go update. They changed the YAML stuff a little bit. But it does the same thing, build and deploy, runs through all the actions. Now I have extra actions in here because when I originally set up the YAML, they had a broken build process. So it wouldn't build my Gridsome app naturally the way that I was supposed to. So I ended up updating all the YAML so it would build my site correctly. And then I just used their stuff to build and to deploy. And I could actually go back and revert all this to defaults and it should work perfectly fine. But I built two versions of my site every time I do a commit. And the biggest reason I use this is strictly for new for staging sites. So like, all right, I want to see what this long post looks like in production. I push it up into a staging environment, go look at the URL. It's literally what it's going to look like when it's in production, and everything's great. And yeah, it just works so well, even though this was never going to be the production site the way it is. I wish they would let you override the name of the Azure Static Web Apps to something that's a little bit more manageable. Yeah, right now it's random words and characters. I don't like that. I wish it was better. But yeah, this works insanely well. I had done a little bit of performance benchmarking against Blob Storage and Azure Static Web Apps. And honestly, I didn't see a huge improvement. Like this site is Blob Storage, but it's behind Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is doing all of its magic and caching for me. So I don't think it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. I should set up that comparison, have raw Blob Storage competing against raw Azure Static Web Apps and see what the performance differences are. I honestly don't know. I think the biggest benefit of Static Web Apps is just stuff like this, your syntactic sugar over Static Web Apps for things like rewrites. It's like that's insanely useful. And then if you get any good performance increase on top of that, it'd be nice. Having the serverless stuff built into it, that's really nice. So yeah, so many good things about Static Web Apps. That's why next week I'm going to actually buckle down and convert everything over to Static Web Apps. and just go live with that. But thank you all for hanging out with me.
We got some use cases for this. Who's thinking of using this? What are you using this for? I know this group. There's stuff spinning in people's heads right now, going, "I could use this for this. I could use it for that." What you got? What are you thinking?
What's magical is that it's storage. It's a site on Azure Storage, but then you have a little bit of processing in front. The redirect rules and the Azure Functions APIs.
Yeah.
That makes that last mile of things that you needed to light up really powerful.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I've got this site, but I also need to send an email. Or I've got this site, but I need redirect rules. Where previously I've been baking that into a container or into a web app.
Yep.
It could happen here. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So many times you go, all right, I just need to write a couple lines of server-side code. I don't need much. And that's exactly what Azure Functions are for. It's like, all right, I just need to write a little bit of code. That's what they're good at. Because the alternative is, all right, I have to set up an ASP.NET Core site. I have to set up an Express site. I have to go through all this effort to write 3 lines of code that do one thing. All right, friends. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to when I can be there in person one day.
And we're looking forward to that too.
Yeah.
And I'm
Everyone
looking
get your
forward
shot.
to
Wear your masks.
the beach. Yep. Actually,
We'll have you out here in August.
Chat.
That'll be real fun.
Oh, Todd, they deprecated my routes.json. You know, that's totally a Microsoft thing to do.
Well, config file works though. I like that.
Yeah, this was really, really cool. I'm glad that you showed us
Yeah.
this. I didn't even know this feature was here.
Cool. I could go rewrite that blog post tomorrow. I know what I'm doing tomorrow. Todd, I appreciate that. Thanks for pointing that out.
All right. Well, we can sit here in uncomfortable silence for longer if we want.
It's my bedtime. 10:30. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's way past dark for you. Thanks for staying up late with us, and we'll see you next month.
Anytime. All right, friends. Y'all have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.